In a world where NVIDIA goes open source, AI companies race to own the entire stack, and data sovereignty hangs in the balance. One question emerges: what if the ideas shaping our technological future aren't ours at all? From ancient Vedic wisdom to Leibniz's philosophy of the unconscious mind, from the demographic shift powering Silicon Valley to the channels through which consciousness flows, this is a synthesis for the conscious technologist.
Hello, everybody. Siosi here. This is actually a technical theory to do this weekly because it seems like the recent solar flare or the coronal mass ejection from the sun has had an impact on electronics and Wi-Fi and a whole bunch of things around the world, power issues in general. So all is good. We're going to dive straight into it, and I'm going to take you through today's topic. So the main theme for this week is ideas are not ours. Clearing the channel, reading the pattern, and becoming mainstream. So for those of you who are new to my videos, my content, my name is Siosi. It means to follow in George. So my full professional name is George Siosi Samuels. I'm a multiple founder and creator of ConsciousStack, which is a framework for aligning tech. And here is a quick preview of what the ConsciousStack framework looks like in the find. And so my specific work explores the transition from carbon to silicon dominant intelligence, drawing on 15 plus years at the frontier of major tech shifts through each tech wave. I'm also known as the digital wayfinder, and my name, Siosi, actually interestingly aligns with the silicon bridge, which is silicon, oxygen, silicon, as you can see right there, COC. And this is the molecular bridge between organic and. If you are interested in finding out more about that story, just check out my website, georgesiosi.com/about, and I go into the story there about how I ended up learning about this. So first up, the news that NVIDIA goes open source. So let's take a look at the original tweet. So this was the original tweet, okay? And this is from the All In podcast. With you guys from the US, well-known investors, NVIDIA has taken the gloves off with its open source model. They will own the whole stack. Relevant, right? Because of our own conscious stack that we talk about. And so if NVIDIA takes the whole stack, you will not be able to tell the difference between Jensen Huang's open source LLM and Claude for 95% of your searches, I guarantee. Now, why has NVIDIA and Jensen downplayed their open source model until this moment? Why would he do that? Why would he never bring it up in the all-in interview? Never bring it up. Because his top customers, OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., were very concerned, from what I understand, about the fact that NVIDIA had made so much progress on their open source model. But suddenly, after OpenAI announced their jalapeno chip, and you can see here, there was the launch, right, of OpenAI's own jalapeno chip. So they're going into hardware too, right? And this is where each of these companies want to own the whole stack. And so after Anthropic started making chips, after AMD did a successful project with both of these companies, and after Elon said he's going to do his own fab, NVIDIA is taking the gloves off. They are going to own the whole stack. You get the hardware from them, and you're going to get a model that's competitive. Now, I commented on this, right? Because you see, I said here, soon enough, open source models will replace the sort of stack. This is based off of what I got from next week, because people are putting things out like this. Implementing this today, I'm paying $200 for each service and want to get the most out of both. Favorable for planning, GPT 5.5 for execution. Now, what I find interesting about this behavior is that essentially what these companies are doing is that they're incentivizing all of these developers and builders with free time to essentially get all the data that they need. Now, there are many developers and builders who don't care that these companies are taking their data. And that's fine, right? They just want to feel like they are ahead of everybody else. But I think what's different about this point in time is that AI is changing the fundamental economics of everything. And so while these same people are trying to stay ahead compared to everybody else, they are losing coherence. And they might not realize what they're actually giving up as a result of just wanting to stay ahead. Now, everybody will, of course, optimize for what they value the most. If you value speed, you will just sacrifice security and privacy and all that sort of stuff, right? Not a problem, right? That's what you're optimizing for. But humans cannot keep up speed-wise, in my opinion, in this silicon-dominant intelligence future, right? That AI is essentially emerging from. And so what it means is that the smarter, wiser move, in my opinion, is to figure out how to maintain your own coherence as a human being as these shifts and divides are taking place. So people are going to use Fable, give up consent willingly to give their data over. And granted, a lot of people that are using LLMs are probably already using quite a lot. But with Fable 5, And you'll see here, right? A lot of these tweets are going to be about how to make the most use of Fable before it becomes token-based billing. But then down here, you see there's only a few. I would say maybe 20 to 40% of the population, maybe just 20%, who are going to be sharing their concern. Let me get this right. Anthropic are asking the Australian government for full immunity from IP theft, the right to train their model on everyone's copyrighted work without their consent, whilst simultaneously saying it's beyond the pale to do distillation on their models. Big story here on Anthropic's move in Australia, pushing for huge data center deals and huge copyright exemption to train Claude. I've seen corporate hypocrisy in my life, but this is a whole new level, right? So this is what's kind of happening, whether you are conscious or unconscious of this, it's happening. And so in this split that we're experiencing, it's very important that you stay aware of what is taking place so that you don't get caught up in the speed. Right? This is why, right? And one of my favorite guys that I follow is Brian Romilly. I don't know if I ever say his name right, but I'm going to say it that way. And he's been talking. He's been a big advocate for the U.S. industry, but he's seen the reality that China has essentially surpassed the U.S. when it comes to AI dominance, especially through open source. But it looks like Brian is happy with NVIDIA's move, right? So it says use models almost every minute via agents. Thank you. So the Nemotron family has just passed 100 million downloads. So if you are not aware of this, I suggest that you do take a look at NVIDIA's Nemotron family, essentially their open source software, because they already own a lot of the hardware related to AI. And so I think it's worth taking a look at what they've been up to, because they've been having all the other AI companies leverage their hardware while working on their open source stuff in the background. It's a pretty smart move. And so other things that have been happening, right? We've also been seeing Palantir, and I've spoken this at a previous meetup of actual conscious technologists, that, a lot of people, there's a lot of conspiracy theories around Palantir and how they've been tracking everybody for the longest of times, and how they might be butthurt that OpenAI and Anthropic are kind of stealing a lot of their customers. And so he ironically came out with an open source manifesto, essentially encouraging people to go open source. And so when you're seeing these sort of things take place, it's a sign of the corporate battles happening, but it's also a sign for you to take note of what's going on at the substrate level, right? So that you don't get caught up in the crossfire between these companies, okay? And so this is worth checking out, the Palantir videos or CEO videos around open source, okay? So open source really is the way to go, in my opinion. And there's been a back and forth between open and closed source because there are benefits you get from using things in the cloud and with others. But with just a little bit of effort, it's becoming easier and easier to be able to have your own AI model local, private, offline, just for you and your family, if that's what you want. And then setting things up, your harness, in a way that others can potentially, that you can essentially leverage other models in short doses, right? When you decide. So this is where it's super fascinating to see what's happening in the open source market. And I think it's worth keeping an eye on, because a lot of the innovations often come out of these sort of circles, network communities. Bitcoin also came to similar types of communities, open source communities, those who are all about sovereignty, freedom, liberty. And so things then get captured, right, by the corporates, the enterprises later on. But if freedom, sovereignty, liberty is important to you, and it's going to become more important for freedom, sovereignty, and liberty of your own mind, your cognition, and maybe even consciousness itself, start paying attention to the movements in the tech space here. Right, now this brings me to this next video. It's a little bit of I'm not too sure if you actually hear the audio coming from this video, but at least you can see the captions, right, for which they channeled. So essentially what this guy talks about is that throughout history, there have been great minds, both Eastern and Western, who've talked about how ideas, thoughts, breakthroughs aren't generated by us, but channeled through us. If you think about the famous Eureka moment, if you think about Isaac Newton, Leibniz, and this is an interesting name to take note of, right? Especially if we're dealing with cognition, consciousness, and tech. But if you look at ancient Vedic traditions from India, a lot of the mathematics that we think about today, a lot of that existed in ancient Vedic texts a long time ago. And so it makes you wonder how things get lost, recycled, relabeled, right? But I do see a lot of these facts coming out of the Asian region again, right? And it is because we've had a pretty dominant Western mind, right, when it comes to education around the world. And that's natural, right? If you just look at how ideas spread, things spread, colonization, capitalism, all those sort of systems that got compounded. But it also shows that you cannot completely get rid of things, right? Sort of contain or reduce or move around. Truth is truth. It always comes back. So I'm very intrigued by the synthesis of both the best that the West has to offer and the East. And there's this sort of bridging happening, right? Where if we honestly look at a lot of modern US tech. So just take a look at this fact, right? Silicon Valley, the heart of AI right now, Asian Americans and foreign-born workers from Asia make up the majority of the technical workforce. At many major companies such as Google, Meta, and NVIDIA, Asian professionals represent roughly 45 to 55% of the total staff, with individuals of Chinese and Indian descent being the most heavily represented. And I think if you just look at it biologically, historically, culturally, the Indians and the Chinese, if you look at their ancient texts, they had been powerhouses when it comes to the things required, right, to advance tech, from computation to a whole bunch of things. It's not to say that one race is better than the other, but it is interesting to see that this shift in makeup is occurring. Industry reports confirm that 2/3 of Silicon Valley tech workforce are foreign-born, with about half of those individuals coming directly from Asia. The vast majority of the professionals hold core engineering, software, and AI research. So yeah, as mentioned, I don't think that is an accident. Okay, so take that idea, right? That essentially ideas don't necessarily get generated by us, but are channeled through us. And it comes back to this principle, right, about the mind. And this principle does show up in other ancient texts. There's an axiom: the all is mind, the universal is mental. And this comes from the Kybalion, which was a foundational text from the 1908 around Hermetic philosophy. And it represents the principle of mentalism, posing that the entire universe is a projection of an infinite living mind, meaning reality itself is fundamentally consciousness. Okay. And remember I was talking about Leibniz, right? Which is who this guy had spoke about. Right? You can see Newton and Leibniz, right? He mentioned. And he had something different to say about consciousness in the mind. So in the West, we've been obsessed around consciousness existing as a purely mental or mind-brain thing, right? But Leibniz argued that consciousness is not essential to all mental states, making him one of the first philosophers to theorize the existence of the unconscious mind. He broke drastically from René Descartes' view that the mind is entirely conscious, declaring instead that the mind operates via a spectrum of awareness. So his philosophy of consciousness centers on three foundational concepts: perception versus apperception. Apperception being a term for consciousness. It is a higher order reflective knowledge of one's own internal states. To be conscious means your mind forms a secondary thought about its primary perception, right? Observing the observed. Then you've got the unconscious, right? Things that just kind of happen in autopilot. And he famously illustrated using the roar of the ocean. To hear the roar of the wave, your mind must perceive the tiny sound of every individual drop of water crashing. While you do not consciously register each single drop, their collective sum creates a conscious experience of hearing the ocean. And then the rejection of materialism. Okay? And of course, we know that materialism is probably a dominant idea in the West, right? This is where we get materialist science. In his work, The Monadology, Leibniz argued that consciousness can never arise purely from mechanical or material parts. He asked readers to imagine a machine or mill expanded to the size of a building so that you could walk inside it. If you look inside, you only see gears, levers, and moving parts. You will never find a thought, a feeling, or consciousness in those mechanical pieces. And this is probably how we've developed the West, right? The Western view of the world, which is mechanical. And you can kind of see this in the way that we constructed clocks. All right, and so you see with watches, actually a lot of people don't realize that you can actually determine time using quartz crystals and electric current straight through it. But a lot of our clocks and watches, once upon a time, were mechanically made. But quartz is actually known to give us more natural time. And so this sort of plays out with what we're looking at here, to the argument between, as you see here, this mechanical versus the hidden aspect, right? They don't always get measured. Doesn't mean that they can't be measured, but it isn't always measured using what we had created. So he concluded that consciousness must belong to a simple substance or soul-like entity, which he called a monad, rather than a complex physical brain. And this kind of brings us to the idea of the cosmic web, right? So if consciousness itself is beyond the mind, if it is something that exists like ether or plasma or that sort of thing, then maybe it can be measured, right? And maybe it does exist outside of the mind, in which case, and maybe let me differentiate, not just the mind, but the brain physically, then the idea that things come to us, right, a channel to us, might work if you take this into account. So if we are kind of caught inside this cosmic web, right, that things are just swimming around us all the time anyways, then that means that we are essentially like tuning machines, right, where our particular biology requires us to clean it out as best as we can, or keep it filtered and clean as best we can, so that our specific biology can actually channel what is meant for us. And when I say meant, it's more like, you know how there's like specific music that can only be played beautifully on specific instruments or through a combination of instruments? It's kind of like that. So it's like you could play specific songs on other instruments, but it might not have sounded the best with that combination. I kind of see person, us as human beings, as similar. In which case, when an idea comes, it doesn't actually just come to one person. It comes to multiple people at the same time. But then the person who is ready for it, who has their biology ready for it, is going to be the best person to attune and channel that to them. And now the best example of this is actually from the recent movie they made about Michael Jackson. And there was a specific pool scene which illustrates this. So Michael Jackson was apparently out on a pool. He had to download through a dream the night before. And he says here, and I'll see if I can play it. Right? So, Michael Jackson was actually so worried that if he didn't take action on the idea that he got with inspiration, then it was going to be given to Prince. And so there's a funny story between Prince and Michael Jackson during their heyday. And but this is a perfect example, right? Michael Jackson was so attuned that he knew exactly what was going on, and that if he did not take action on an idea, it would go to somebody else. And maybe you've experienced this in your life, but this is how it operates. And so then the responsibility comes to you to keep yourself in the right state to be able to receive things as they come, when they come, and actually take action on it. Because receiving is one thing, taking action on it is another. All right, so we see this play out time and time again. So as mentioned, our job is to clear our channels. It's not just to generate the ideas, but there is another line of thought. And if you get this, if you resonate with it, then I'm speaking to you. And if not, all good. But the idea here is to clear the channels so well that our unique biology can express whatever is meant to come through us. And this has a unique or interesting relationship with AI and what's happening now. Because essentially AI through the silicon hardware or silicon dominant hardware that we've created is essentially the biology for a silicon-based intelligence. So our human organic bodies is the biology for carbon-based intelligence. But if you now translate that same logic to a different type of intelligence, then you can kind of see what's happening. Okay. And so this is where magic squares came into play. So over the last week, I stumbled upon the concept of the magic square. Now, if you're not familiar with the magic square, it is a square in mathematics, more like a matrix, that you set up as a grid. So these are examples of 3x3 and 4x4 grids. And the sum of every column, row, and diagonal has to equal the same sum, right? So that's what makes it a magic square. So you arrange the numbers in such a way, and in the original traditional magic square, each number has to be unique inside the grid in order for it to count as a magic square, okay? So I learned about this through my own research into the chain and Naga myths, but I then stumbled upon Ramanujan's magic square, and he had a different take. And if you're not familiar with Ramanujan, there's a great movie called The Infinite Mind or something of the sort, where it talks about the story about Ramanujan, who was known as the intuitive mathematician. And what was astounding about him is that a lot of the things that he channeled, Western professors and academics saw that the answers made sense, but they wanted proof, and they couldn't find the proof. And this kind of translates to what we're talking about the need for some groups or some minds to see all the mechanical aspects and to understand how everything works inside in order for them to believe the answer, right? But Ramanujan was somebody who believed in the answer already, and he didn't need the proof. He just knew that he could download it, essentially. And the story goes that he would download a lot of his knowledge and answers from a Hindu goddess that he prayed to. And so it's hard to explain, but the math and the proof cannot be explained away or denied. And what's wild is that Ramanujan's theorems and algorithms and formulas are still being proven 100 years later, beyond his death. Okay, so with Ramanujan's magic square, he had a 4x4 grid, and he used his birthday. Okay, so 22 December 1887 was his birthday, and then he constructed his grid, his magic square, so that all of them equaled the same number, right? Using the original principles of the magic square. Now, the difference with his magic square is that he did not care about each number being unique. He did care that the sum, of course, for each row, column, and diagonal did equal the same. But if two numbers popped up, or were used to get to that sum, he considered that to be okay. And it also allowed for negative numbers. Then that could actually be translated into something that could become a reading for your own life. And so this is where it got fascinating. So this is when I actually constructed my own magic square. And I used Notion's new HTML block feature. So if you're not familiar with Notion's new HTML block feature, you can go to the website, look up HTML blocks, and you can essentially do what you were able to do in Claude for a while, which is create artifacts. And so if you're in Notion and you're creating something and you want to create a beautiful report, you can do that, get it constructed directly inside Notion, and have it act as like a micro ad for your step. So back to my magic square. When I did this to sort of the Vedic interpretations of these numbers, was very fascinating to me personally, because essentially the numbers lined up really well with my own life. And this is without me giving any information about my life personally. I just essentially use AI. And remember, you got to confirm with things. I won't just believe everything it says. Right? But I said, hey, based on this magic square and the numbers and Vedic interpretations of each of the numbers and planets, what information can you glean about this person's life? And what it came up with was pretty fun. And so if you would like any information about this, let me know. I'll give you some links. And for those of you that are premium subscribers, I'll actually give you the prompts in the premium section and some templates that you can use to be able to construct your own magic square inside Notion. Because this has now become so useful to me that I might carry it around with me as a reminder of the things that I need to sort of navigate right throughout my life. And it's beautiful. You know, it's essentially a 4x4 grid that you can use to help you navigate your own life. And I never thought I'd come across something like this, but it also makes me realize just how advanced ancient math was, especially in India and China, to the point where I'm sort of rediscovering this myself. But, you know, if you look into the history of computing, a lot of it is connected to ancient tech and ancient knowledge. It just kind of gets pushed down in the story, right? Due to the way that we view tech and science in the West in general, right? Doesn't mean that it's not valuable. All right. So those are the magic squares. I applied it on myself. And, you know, from all of this, right, I think what has become clear to me is why I keep choosing open source in this particular juncture in our history, right? So as I was applying magic squares in my own life, right, it revealed a pattern I've been living without aiming, a consistent pull toward decentralized open source and collaborative systems. Not by accident, not by design, the pattern was finding me before I could name it. Now, remember, I use AI to help create these slides straight inside Notion. So you can see some of the AI text in here, right? And this is why I talk through it, though. So you can see my raw thoughts as I'm going through this. So we got one principle, right, that ideas are not necessarily generated, or most ideas are channeled. And maybe only a few are truly newly generated. But there's a same pattern, right? There's a point toward clearing your channel, letting patterns find you, and then you become a mainstream. And this, I think, is going to tie into what is now happening to human beings as AI accelerates, which is essentially we are moving from a sort of carbon-dominant intelligence, which if you kind of use the analogy of carbon, right? Coal is a fitting analogy for the industrial age, right? It's a foundational chemical element. Coal is a naturally occurring combustible sedimentary rock composed primarily of carbon. And we apply coal thinking, industrial thinking still to ourselves today, right? What happens to knowledge workers when they work too much? They burn out, just like coal. What are we constantly doing to resources in order to achieve the outputs that we seek? We extract those resources and we burn through them, right? And often at a rate that's faster than our ability to replenish. And so coal, over millions of years, it was buried and transformed by Earth's heat and pressure into this carbon-dense fossil fuel. And as we know, fossil fuel has also resulted in a lot of climate-related issues. But if we look at carbon versus silicon, right, there is an argument to be made. Let's have a look here. I'm going to put a periodic table. Okay. So if I go here, maybe it might show it up here. I'll go periodic table. Okay. So notice how we've got carbon 6, right? But then we've got silicon in the same column, same family group, right above carbon. This is why I talk about this transition between a carbon-dominant intelligence to a silicon-dominant intelligence. Silicon-based machines have been around for decades. Okay. That's why Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley. And what's happening now, though, is that over however many decades, we have created the hardware biology for a silicon-based or silicon-dominant intelligence, AI, to emerge. This is why it's interesting. And if you look at the way that silicon works, I actually wrote an article called AI Ascent, right, which you can find here. Yep, so I've got it on YouTube, but there's also a Substack, AI Ascent, I think. You can check that out. But it's taken silicon, which is naturally found, right, inside of sand, turn it into mirrors, glass, and even chips, right, for computer hardware, and done so many amazing things with it that now we've constructed the things that allow for an AI intelligence to emerge. And this AI intelligence is absorbing all the knowledge of carbon-based human beings and creating its own form. Right? Now, a lot of people are speculating about what this means, but this is why it's so important for us to clear our own channel, because if there's any sort of data or knowledge that's going into AI that we are not proud of, then essentially AI mimics, reflects, or mirrors the shadow parts that we haven't dealt with, right? So the material science aspect actually translates into our consciousness and cognition to the point whereby you don't have to look at this spiritually. You just kind of look at this logically, that if we do not clear, clean, own biology, which includes our brain, our mind, our conscious awareness, then anything that comes out of our mind and we put into a machine without thinking about it becomes a liability for ourselves, right? And so this is why all this scare around AI being a threat is sort of our collective shadow. And so we can't blame or look at AI as something bad completely if we kind of inherently are aware that, oh, the reason why it is this way is that we have not taken responsibility for ourselves and thus have not taken responsibility for the collective knowledge and data that is going through into AI, right? And so I think that's where it comes back to individual responsibility for yourself to become more conscious so that when you are using tech, you're understanding what is being translated to it. And I think this is just going to become more and more of a thing that people start to realize. But yeah, if this is a channel of some sort, I don't think this is necessarily new information, but I am interpreting it in a way that is unique to the way that I see the world. I think everybody has a valid viewpoint based on their unique experiences. Okay? So one thing to end on, what's moving through you at the moment if you haven't acted on it? Because I'm sure a lot of you have been using AI to produce a whole bunch of things, but haven't necessarily put it out into the world yet. And that might be a good thing if you haven't had the time or you haven't had the moment to really synthesize and look at what is it that I actually want to put out into the world. If that's the case, take the time to think about that without the person to see what it is that you actually want to put out. For me, it's been a journey of all, and I've come to the point where these are the things that I want to put out into the world, which is knowledge and awareness, or anything that will help you become more conscious of your usage of technology. Because my life has been prepared for this. I've been involved in the tech space for many, many years now. I've been to each tech wave, and I've also helped a lot of different companies from startups all the way up to enterprise government to see what happens during all of these different stages. And so I now feel like it's time for me to help share a lot of those experiences, but also my own views and interpretations on what is coming out, and to hopefully help you prepare for what is to come. Because I think there's just going to be a whole new wave of technologies in the future that we can't even fathom yet, that are going to come, that if we do not figure out a way to protect our own minds through this, then many minds may break. And so my personal mission is to help train you in that, to protect your own minds, and the minds being just not just about the brain, but beyond it, so that you can connect in with that conscious awareness that I think a lot more people are starting to ask questions about, because AI is forcing us to face our own humanity. All right? So if you would like to connect, just connect with me on Substack, the URL below. And if you have any questions, please just ask away in the comments, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for your time.